Welcome to another episode of the Retro Recall podcast. Today we are talking collecting. I'm here with Bill, Steve, and I am Rom. This episode's going to be, like I mentioned, all about collecting. This is not just for the beginners, it's for intermediate folks too, just to kind of give everybody a little bit of a broad stroke of information on what our personal collecting goals are, what our personal collections are, and what we feel about sealed games, tips to find the best games, and applications like price charting or GameEye, things to help augment your collection. All right, so the first topic is, when did you start collecting? Steve, you go first, then we'll go up to Bill, and then I'll go ahead and chime in.
So collecting is an interesting topic because I feel like collectors a lot of times are not so much made, but they're born. Those that collect like video games, it's very likely you collected something else along the way, whether it was sports cards. Like I know when I was a kid, I picked up all the baseball cards I could. You know, when I had my games, like I kept my manuals, I kept my stuff together. I have some of the original boxes when I was a kid, and you know, I moved from hobby to hobby. Like I got into musical instruments when I was in high school era. I started collecting different guitars, refurbishing them. I did a lot of that with my dad. We even built several of my main guitars that I play myself were hand built by the two of us. So, you know, it kind of moved from there. I went into collecting guitar pedals, and after I graduated college and I moved, had my first full-time job, I started kind of getting a little bit of an itch for some of those older games that I hadn't played in a long time. I was like, man, I somewhere along the way, I lost my copy of Aladdin for Sega Genesis. And I went out and I bought a copy of Aladdin for Sega Genesis. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. So I went out and bought another copy. I can't remember if it was Sonic and Knuckles, but I started picking up a few things, and things weren't too expensive. This was back around, I think around like 2010. You know, a couple years before that, I had gone into a movie store that was closing out, and they had all their Dreamcast stuff. And the guy's like, yeah, give me $50. Everything will go in a box and it's yours. So I was like, okay. I mean, it wasn't anything crazy, but I ended up with like 3 consoles, a bajillion controllers, a couple games, a ton of memory cards. And it was just like, wow, that's kind of cool. So I kind of slowly peeked into that. That was like 2008 timeframe. And then from there, once I started buying Genesis stuff, I just pick up something here, pick up something there. I remember winning a Final Fantasy NES complete in box for like really cheap, like $30 or something on eBay on an auction. And then I started doing that. I started watching those late night auctions that would just like close at a weird hour. I'd be up, you know, playing on my phone. And I remember Turtles in Time popped up. That's how I got my complete in box Turtles in Time. I think I paid under $100 for that, which is pretty good in today's dollars for that game. So yeah, it just kind of took off from there. And you know, around the time when I found out I was going to become a dad, I was like, wow, I really want to get like some more of these games to kind of share with like my kid when you know, some of my youth and some of the things I did and enjoyed. And from there, it started picking up. I made a contact where I bought a huge amount of video games from somebody that was like a garage sailor that, you know, was looking to just off sell at reseller prices, and started buying, flipping, and it just exploded from there. So that's kind of how I got into it. But, you know, I found a real passion. The more I've dug into this, and those that are listening in here, I'm sure have similar stories, but there's a lot of great communities, a lot of great people. I mean, here with Bill and Rom today, I met both of them on Remead's Discord, and, you know, I made a lot of good friendships. So this is like a hobby that I feel is going to stick for a lifetime kind of situation. And I think a lot of people are that way. How about you guys? Bill, you want to tell us a little bit about your collecting origins?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think it's, you know, a similar situation with me. You know, when I was a kid, same thing. Sports cards were kind of my jam. Basketball, football, baseball cards, I had them all. In fact, I still have giant boxes full. Unfortunately, the era that we collected sports cards back in the late 80s, early 90s, there's an abundance of it. I'm sure that they're not worth much nowadays, but, you know, no Mickey Mantles or Babe Ruths or anything crazy. But yeah, as you progress and get older, you know, you kind of return back to something from your childhood. And just like you, Steve, you know, I was in college as well, early 2000s even, and I was already rocking an eBay account. And I remember going to the counter hey, I have a package. And, the person at the counter, because you're at college, you got this little tiny little mailbox. And they're like, oh, yeah, you do have a package. And then next week, hey, you have another package? Yeah. 2 weeks later, you have another package? So I was kind of known as the package dude back in college, just getting lots of like NES games and Genesis games and all this weird stuff. And I remember just a couple different things that really hooked me were those clamshells of the Genesis games. And then similar story, I, started a family and kind of slowed down a bit, and I made the mistake of selling it all, which, a lot of us have done stuff like that, sold a bunch of stuff and kind of regret it later. And but you kind of get that bug again and kind of get the itch. So this time around, I really got bit hard by the bug. So about in the middle of COVID, well, actually at the beginning of it, 2020, early 2020, I got, I don't even know what it was. I think I picked up an NES and I tried to get it going again because it wasn't working. And that's how I discovered the Green Bean server. And then from there, it just kind of went off the complete deep end, gotten into collecting all kinds of different stuff. And like you said, Steve, probably going to be a lifelong hobby for sure. So that's kind of where I got my start.
I think it's interesting too, because I think I met you around that time frame, Bill, around 2020. I remember you were asking me lots of questions about Sega Genesis in particular, and I was really swaying you over to the better system in that era. And I put together that top list ranking of all my favorite Sega Genesis games are those that are worth playing. I will add that to our social media. I'll drop in my list. So if you want to go check out some of the better titles, according to me, this is stuff I've played. Not all of it I've played in depth, versus I've taken into account others' opinions too that I respect. So I'll put that on the server. You can check it out. And Rom, I saw you shaking your head over there about Sega Genesis.
Yeah, it is the definitive list for sure. No kidding. I mean, I refer to that thing all the time.
Man, yeah, I was just on the Nintendo camp. Like that's kind of what I started with, and that's just kind of where I was now. There are some good Sega games. I'm not gonna lie, mostly beat 'em up.
My first system ever was a Nintendo.
Same
so
here.
I absolutely I love Nintendo too. So we only give you a hard time, Rom, because you like to give it.
Yeah. Oh, if you dish it out, you gotta take it too. Segue into my stuff. It's funny, like both of y'all mentioned collecting sports cards, and I did too. I collected football cards back in the early 80s, late 80s, and I lost them. Like it's kind of the story goes. Like I collected a lot of like Series 1's Transformers back in the day, and then they just disappeared. Same with my football cards. But I never really as a kid, I'd always I think everybody kind of got bit by like, hey, you go to Funko Land or you go to GameStop or whatever and trade in your stuff to get new stuff. And I kind of got caught up in all that. So I never really had anything from my childhood because I was like, I just want to get the newer things. So I started collecting a little bit when I was in college, but not to the extent to even call myself a collector. And so got kids and everything. And then slowly I would pick up a thing here and there. Like I remember picking up a Sega CD because I really wanted to play Eternal Champions. And I just kind of kept that back and I actually found the game. But my Sega CD, of course, I sold. But COVID is when I really started really, really collecting again because what else are we going to do? Real quick, can y'all look and see when I joined Renbean server? Because time is weird for me.
April 21st, 2021.
I joined. I happened to be looking on Twitch, and there's a guy. We know we're on his server too. Young Games 916. I'm just like, what is this guy doing? He's selling games on Twitch, and I'm like, this is it's a little weird. I'd never seen it before, and this was back in 2020, and I started watching. I was like, oh my gosh, he's got some stuff that I want. And I ended up spending like $120 that first night. And I'm like, I'm about to give some strange person on the internet my info so he can send me stuff. And I'm going to send him just blindly like, oh, here's $120 and I'm going to expect you to send me this back. And then after the transaction went amazingly, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm hooked. And then so I was in his server for probably close to 8 or 9 months before I discovered Renbeans and met you guys. And yeah, it just kind of snowballed, and now I have a lot of stuff. At one point, I was up to like 300 NES games. I kind of the bug hit me hard, and so in order to supplement my collecting, I was 3D printing stuff and like buying lots. Now here I am. I got a bunch of stuff, and I'm not stopping either. It's a lot of fun, even when there's a little dip, and I think we'll discuss that a little bit, kind of like how things have kind of gone down a little bit the past few months. But that's kind of my story. Next up, I'm going to ask real kind of quick questions here. What is your most, not prize collection, but collection piece, but what's your most sentimental or valuable to you part of your collection? Bill, go ahead.
Yeah.
We'll go around the table.
I have a few really nostalgic. I know we throw the term nostalgia out there, all the time, but I mean, it's true. I have some really nostalgic pieces. Steve, you had mentioned that you had some games from your childhood that you still had in box. Rom, I think you said you didn't necessarily.
Yeah.
I had sold everything. However, when you're a kid, sometimes some stuff still ends up at your parents' place and stays there for decades when you get to be our age. Well, after I got into this hobby, in the back of my brain, I was like, my parents don't throw anything. So one of these days when I go visit them, I'm going to dig and look, and I bet I got to find something. Well, sure enough, after quite a bit of digging through my dad's stuff, I was able to find a complete in-box Mega Man 3 and Super Mario Bros. 3 and Nintendo World Cup. So those are my three prized childhood pieces that were brand new when I got them back in 1990. That's when those three games dropped. 1990 is a good year in NES games. So I have those, in a nice protector. They're actually in good shape. And so I'm really, really happy about those. Some other games come to mind. I have a really nice copy of Bucky O'Hare for the NES, which if you're in the collecting game, that's a sought after, expensive title. That was actually given to me from a friend who I had recognized that he had it in his collection. And I kind of told him that I was getting back into this hobby. And I asked him just one day, I was like, hey, you still have your NES? And he's like, yeah. I was like, you still have that Bucky O'Hare game that we used to play when we were kids? And he's like, yeah, why? He's like, you'll never believe this, but that thing's worth like a pile of money or a couple $100 or whatever. And he's like, really? And of course I was like, he'll maybe let me play it or something, or he'll get into the hobby or something. And after thinking about it for a while and stuff, he's just like, this hobby is really cool. And, send me pictures of stuff you got. And I'm kind of interested in stuff, but he's like, I was thinking about it. Like, you're super into it. You can just have this thing. And I was like, no way. Seriously? He's like, yeah, absolutely. And just some other, really generous gifts. I've had games given to me, heavy games, a couple $100 games. Like I'm very blessed and feel very fortunate. And it's so those are just some prize pieces they're really cool that I'm probably never going to sell.
For me, I think a lot of times, like when we talked about prized collection items, sometimes it comes to mind like, hey, what was the hardest thing that you was to acquire? You may think of prize as what's the most expensive thing in your collection. But like you mentioned, Bill, some of my favorite things in my collection are not about what they cost. They're more about the memories or nostalgia around them. I still have my first video games, which were 3 NES games. I have the original Legend of Zelda. It's in terrible shape. It's beat to hell, but I love that thing because that was mine. I have Yoshi's Cookie, which I still hate that game, but I enjoy that I have it. And I also have the original triple pack of Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and World Class Track. So I remember playing those as a kid. Definitely Banjo-Tooie. I kept the original complete in box, everything for it. I actually folded the boxes up so they stayed in nice shape. I don't know how I had the foresight to do that as a kid, but certainly happy that I did. And one of the things I did early on when I started collecting again is like for Christmas one year, people asked me what I wanted. I said, I want some old video games. And I made a list of the ones that I remembered the most. And I started getting like, my mom was like, "You're gonna have to send me a link for this. I don't know what to buy on eBay." So I remember sending out links, and like one would get sold, and then she'd be like, "I got to find another one." I got Donkey Kong 64. I had lost my Star Fox 64, which I played the hell out of that game as a kid. And then I still have my original Sonic 2. That's definitely, I can't tell you how many hours I put into Sonic 2 on the original Sega Genesis. That I will always treasure that card, even though it's worth like nothing. uh, but, Power Rangers the movie is probably another one for Game Gear. I still have my original copy. I not only have that original copy, but I also have a complete in box copy and a sealed copy. So if that tells you how I care about that, it's a really hard one to find sealed. So, definitely some memories, definitely a few items that I treasure. And, there's expensive stuff too. Like if we're talking like price, like harder to find stuff, definitely Crusaders Ascenti is up there for me for Sega Genesis. It's a really expensive game, but I actually really like that game. And so I think, even though it's probably not worth the price, I don't think any game's really worth the price of like, $2,000 for a CIB copy or whatever it is today, 1,500. But the game itself is an absolute blast. So I'd recommend playing that any way you can if you never tried that one. Definitely a Sega Genesis gem. Rom, how about you? What are some of your prized or items you treasure the most in your collection?
So I was just thinking about this, just trying to stamp in my answer here. To me, my complete in box Chrono Trigger, I think, is up there just because it's my favorite game of all time. And when I started collecting, I was like looking at prices. I was like, wait a minute, it's that expensive? And because Chrono Trigger at the beginning, like toward the middle of the pandemic, was up to like $1,200 for a complete in box copy. And I just happened to come across the game only, and I was like, well, let me see what I can do to piece it together. And I remember buying a box for $180, and I was like, did I really just spend $180 on a box? And I'm like, yeah, it was worth it. It's good because buying and selling. I was able to bring some money in so I could justify it and not feel really bad for doing it. But once I put all those pieces together, it was like I I was hooked. Like I'm not. I hate it. Cardboard is so expensive, and I have very few complete in box games, but definitely that one was probably my top, and it's because of nostalgia. And I mean, it's still kind of valuable, but it was more so like, man, this is my favorite game, and then I kind of took it to the next level, and I went and did all the SquareSoft games and got them all complete once I got the Chrono Trigger. So there's that, and all my CIB Mega Bands for NES. I think those are probably my two. And then kind of a unique one, which, I mean, I got it sitting right back there that I just got recently, is the gold Punch Out for Famicom. I happened to just come across, someone linked it on eBay, and I'm like, that's a pretty good price. I might snag it. And I was kind of thinking of like making it to flip, but I'm thinking of keeping it now. But yeah, those are kind of, I mean, I got a lot, but those are the Chrono Trigger definitely stands out the most. So next up, kind of a quick talk about what do you have in your collection? And I know that's a very, very broad statement, but what was your focus like when you are collecting and what you have right now? I know you two probably, my guess is more Sega, but I know as kind of learning, talking to you guys a little bit more, I know there's a lot of video game art and other things as well that are video game related. So Bill, what kind of summarize the contents of your collection and kind of what you kind of focus on, or maybe some outlining things in your collection?
Yeah, I will walk us down a real quick stroll of my method to my madness of collecting. I first started back in 2020 when I really kind of decided I was going to start collecting a lot. I kind of bought whatever I could get. I was buying PS2 games. I was buying PS3 games. I was buying N64. I was buying, the whole gamut. And then after a while, it's kind of like, what am I doing? I need to, kind of focus on something more, laser focus a little bit. So I kind of decided that the cartridges is kind of where I was going to kind of live. So I pretty much NES, Super NES, Genesis, and then actually a couple years in, I kind of even fine tuned it a little more, and I would say like 80% of my collection is probably NES and Genesis, and that's it. So one from the 8-bit world, one from the 16-bit era, and that's it. So I have like 140 NES cartridges, and then I have about 150 Genesis cartridges, and so that's roughly 300, and I have a little less than 500 games total. So that's a big bulk of it there. Some other stuff that I do have some collecting goals for is Game Gear and Game Boy. I've enjoyed the handhelds a bit, which is also cartridges. I have recently gotten into imports a fair amount too. That's a whole nother rabbit hole we could all jump down. But Famicom, Super Famicom, and Japanese Game Boy. Also, I really enjoy PC Engine, the Hue cards, something like that. Those little turbo chips, or if you want to talk about turbo graphics, which is same thing but North America. And I had never even seen such a weird thing, like what a Hue card or a turbo chip was. That was like, what is this, and how did this exist back in the 90s? And I didn't know about it, and it was just really fascinating to me. So that's kind of another thing that I really like to go after is those Hue cards.
Did you ever go after the Sega Master System? They have a whole set of Hue cards on those too. That was even earlier than the PC Engine stuff.
So yeah, I do have some of the Sega cards. Yep, and I don't have an actual Master System anymore, but I've got the adapter that goes in the top of your Genesis that's got the card slot and stuff, and then so I can play them that way. But yeah, that was kind of an afterthought too. It was just like, whoa, Sega's got this too. Like these are just weird. They look like little credit cards, So it's kind of a unique thing to kind of chase after, something different. So that's kind of where I'm at. So I kind of live in the cartridge world, to make a long story short here. So that's kind of where I'm at. Who else wants to chime in?
Yeah, so my collecting journey has gone through a lot of different avenues, and I think we're going to talk about set collecting here soon. So some of my journey revolves around set collecting, but I kind of started off. It was by what I was nostalgic for, and I grew up with all sorts of different systems. We were definitely a Sega area, so when it came to NES, of course it was NES. There was no Master System in our area. I never even heard of the Master System until I started collecting and getting back into retro games. But then Sega Genesis popped up, and everybody I knew had a Sega Genesis. I knew like one kid that had a Super Nintendo. So naturally, I have a lot of nostalgia for Sega Genesis in that era. Sure, I played Super Mario World. Sure, I played Super Metroid because, that was like the one or two big games that, kids had. You didn't have 5 billion games back then. They were expensive. I mean, you look at the retail prices, some of those games are $80-$90. That was crazy expensive back then. But I started off picking up games I liked, and then I started moving towards set collecting. And then as I got through set collecting, I kind of rearranged my priorities and realized that, hey, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not. And then I moved into, collecting for every system, basically, disc, cartridge, whatever. And then once I started getting like a lot of the games I cared about or games I always wanted to play that I never really played back in the day, I started realizing, hey, there's a lot of this like cool advertising, promotional stuff, a lot of display type items. So that's things like the posters you would see in a store. And I'm not talking about like the ones that they would have in like Kmart or Walmart where they were rolled up and you could buy them for $6-8. I'm talking about the ones that they sent to the store that would go in their special case, the nice ones that were like a movie style poster. And they have great graphical art, hey, coming soon. There were standees, the cardboard standees. If, they would put them on, they had the countertop models. They had the ones that would stand 5 feet tall. Some of them were pretty basic. Some of them were super elaborate. So there was a whole group of people, over the years, or warehouses where these things got stuck. And you can go out and buy these things these days. The lighted displays. Anybody remembers the fiber optic displays that, twinkle like stars? I mean, it was pretty wild, the things that Nintendo was building. when they had the old World of Nintendo showcases back in the day. You'd walk in a store, you'd see all these lights and displays and all these vacuum form signs with Mario and all sorts of cool things, holographics on them. Nintendo really went above and beyond. There's actually a collector out there that's created a World of Nintendo book if anybody's interested in learning a little more about the different things that Nintendo put out back then and all the marketing that they did. But once I got through the marketing stuff, like I collected a lot of stuff because those are bulky. They can get and take up a lot of space. Like there's a lot of vinyl banners. I have some really cool ones of like Game Boy Pocket with all the different colors on them. It's like in your face kind of thing. The Play It Loud Game Boys, all that kind of cool stuff where they were popping, those 90 colors or clear, consoles, games, all that kind of cool stuff. And then I moved into the game art collecting community, which we have a full episode around that if you want to check it out, learn a little more about original video game art. But, one of the most nostalgic things for me, beyond playing the games is seeing the box art. So, we all flipped through those wild ads back in the 90s. Some of that stuff wouldn't fly today. It's not kosher. It's not kosher anymore to say certain things or put certain things in ads, but back in the 90s it was bigger, badder, bolder. That was advertising back then, even the 80s. So I've definitely really focused a lot of my collecting these days, since I have most of the games I want, into finding some of that original video game art and some of the every now and again I'll find display stuff, but I got most of what I wanted out of that era. There's lots. Even today they still make a lot of cool display stuff. Nintendo does. It's a little more modern. You get 3D graphics instead of like the hand painted graphics or paintings and things that are on the displays of the old ones. But it's all nice stuff. Rom, how about you?
Yeah, so I think mine was kind of like with Bill. You're kind of like just getting whatever, and I think I decided to, at the beginning, I'm like, I don't want to deal a lot with disc-based stuff, just because, especially, when you start collecting, you kind of have, to me, collecting and reselling is kind of hand in hand, because you kind of need to supplement your income, because as you start moving up, you're buying more expensive things. So I tend to stay away from disc-based stuff, but mainly Nintendo, Game Boy. I've a lot of Game Boy, a lot of Nintendo, a little bit of Sega, but mainly Nintendo is probably my biggest as far as retro goes. I'm on a Switch kick right now, and I've probably got about 300 Switch games, which is, it sounds like a lot, but I think there's over like 2,000 Switch games right now, and it's hard to keep up. But anytime I find a really cool, like, this is a digital only type Switch game, but they're releasing it physical, I'm kind of a sucker for those. So, but as far as like retro stuff, definitely Nintendo. And I decided, as much as I give y'all crap about Sega, because I was definitely a Nintendo guy. Most of my friends had NESs. I had a couple Sega friends, but I've decided to start collecting a full set of Game Gear. And I'm at about 140 out of, I think there's like 260, 263 or something like that. So that's what I've been really focusing on as of right now, is Game Gear and Nintendo Switch. So, but then I got, like Bill mentioned, imports. Famicom Disk System is a really cool console. And so I've got the twin Famicom, and I got a bunch of Famicom disc games. So kind of all over the place. My ADD kind of allows me to do that. And then I'm like, this is maybe too much. So anyway, let's move on.
I actually forgot one quick thing, if you guys don't mind humoring me for 1 second here. Steve, you had mentioned, other things like promotional items and display items, and then obviously the artwork. One little niche thing that I've gotten into is soundtracks. I've really gotten into soundtracks. I've always enjoyed the music in the games. These older games have really unique sounds. The Sega Genesis specifically has just that FM synthesis, like FM sound that's just really, I know some games are really bad, like the twangy fart noises type of thing, but if you get somebody that composer back in the 80s and 90s that knew what they were doing with the hardware. I think it was more of a understanding the hardware issue on some of those bad games. But if you get some of the composers that knew how to use that sound chip, that Yamaha sound chip, man, there's some really unique, interesting sounds that you don't hear in music these days. Some real cool beats and some really interesting sounds. And I just kind of really went down the rabbit hole with that. And there's a lot of new releases of vinyl. You can get these old soundtracks on vinyl. I've got a couple dozen at this point, and that's just been really something that's really cool. That's unique, I think. So, something like Streets of Rage, you can get the whole vinyl set, things like that. So I just want to mention that's another collecting thing that I've really gotten into.
Bill needs to bring back his YouTube videos where he'd set up a camera and he'd have a screen and his vinyl and just play through you got to bring that stuff back, man.
Yeah, it's kind of a fun thing to do. It's kind of unique. I didn't think anyone else would do it. I've got footage where I play like Castlevania, for example. I just pop in my NES, put it live up on the TV, and then have just turn the volume all the way down, and then play the vinyl soundtrack while I'm playing. Because that game has some really cool music and stuff. And so, yeah, it's something kind of unique that I've worked on in the past. So, yeah, I need to bring it back for sure.
I forgot about soundtracks. That's a good point, because I've actually collected some soundtracks over the years. I don't go for like the modern ones, like the vinyls and stuff, although they're really cool. They put some awesome artwork on those things and even make the vinyls look really cool color-wise. But there are some old soundtracks. So back in the day when you'd pre-order games, sometimes they would give out pre-order bonuses. And they made a number of those, especially Nintendo 64 era. It was not uncommon for CD releases. So there's like some cool Zelda soundtracks. There's Banjo-Kazooie had one. Banjo-Tooie had one. There was actually some bundles that came with T-shirts too, where they would just like cellophane wrap and seal up a T-shirt in with the sealed up cellophane wrapped CD. And it's interesting, anytime you collect, like if you have something or a series you really love, there's usually a lot of avenues you can go down, whether it's promotional stuff, whether it's, hey, I want to find the original CD soundtrack. Do I want a sealed copy of it? You're not really limited. There's so many different things you can find.
Yeah, I remember the Killer Cut CD for Killer Instinct. I listen to that all the time.
I think Nintendo did a great job with CD soundtracks for promotional use back in the day. Also, some of them you could buy through mail order too.
Yeah, I was going to mention Symphony of the Night comes to mind. I know they did a lot of promos with that, and you can get that on a big CD set and things like that. Even back, when the game was new type of thing, CDs were obviously like huge in 97 when that launched or whatever.
I didn't know that. I'd love to get the hands on the soundtrack of that. All right, so next up is the biggie. Probably a good chunk of what this podcast is about. We're talking about set collecting, and on top of set collecting, what sets are you going after? Which I kind of revealed my stuff, but and also if you're looking into set collecting, what is the best avenue to get started? I think between the three of us, probably the person that could speak the most to set collecting is going to be Steve, because I know that he's already got a full Game Gear set, which I've been talking to him a lot, just trying to get some good tips on what to pick up. So Steve, I'm going to let you lead that off.
Yeah, so I have a lot of tips and advice for set collecting, and I've changed my opinion a lot about it over the years. When I started out, set collecting was all the rage. That was what you did. It was NES. Everybody wanted a full set of NES. I mean, it was bonkers. People were, going nuts for some of the rare titles. And in retrospect, the prices went even crazier than where they were back when I started getting back into it and started finding some of these communities back in 2010, 2011. So I started off buying everything I could find NES. I was like, I'm going to get a full set just like everybody else is here. And I got well over 400 cartridges. And as I went on for like over the couple years I acquired those, I was like, NES was the first system I ever played. But do I really care about all 400 of these titles? There were so many crappy games on that system that I owned that I would never play. It was just sitting on my shelf. And some of them were expensive, some of them were cheap. So it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I keep all these? Do I put it into something I care more about? And I decided that I was going to pare down that NES set I sold off. I kept about 100 of those cartridges. 100 of the good ones, the fun ones, the ones I remembered, the ones I cared about, or the ones I wish I played but never played back in the day. I got rid of all the ones that are bad games or not fun or things I would never want to play. And it taught me a valuable lesson because at that time, people were starting to transition into N64 set collecting. The reason why I think it went N64 set collecting is there was a manageable amount of games. It was the first system that really kind of caught wildfire that had, like 200 games in the set. That's much more manageable than 1,000 plus. And none of the titles were like crazy, like stadium events at the time. They weren't $10,000. I mean, sure, Sculptor's Cut has run up in price quite a lot because of the N64 set collectors, but it was attainable. But I did the same thing. I shifted. I was like, I love N64. I got that, for, I can't remember, I think for Christmas one year. Maybe I'll get an N64 set. And then I got 3/4 of the way there. It wasn't hard. I was finding these things at garage sales and just through normal pickups. And I kept what I did. I didn't go, online on eBay trying to buy these things. And I got 3/4 and I'm like, wow, like half of these games are terrible. So I said again, I was like, okay, I need to get rid of some of this. What am I doing here? So I sold off, like, I kept 3/4 of my N64 because there is a lot of really good titles or decent titles that I have nostalgia for, but I sold them off again. And all along the way, I had been Sega Genesis collecting, and anything Sega Genesis I could find, I kept it. And lo and behold, I was starting to get up there in title numbers. I was like 400 or 500 games, and I was like, I might as well get the set. And I started to realize that I really cared a lot about Sega Genesis. And I realized that if you don't care enough about a system, you can start off set collecting, you can start off buying everything, but you won't go the distance if you don't have that love for that system at that level. And I also found that Game Gear is that way for me. Nowadays, I don't recommend most people do set collecting. In fact, I would actually recommend you pick up the games you like for a system and start there. And if you do that over time and you pick up some more games and you start to say, hey, I really do love this system like that, I want to get the full set, go for it. Because you're already on your way and you're buying the stuff that if you do decide you don't want to be a set collector, you at least have the games you care about rather than buying all the junk that I ended up with. So, that's my 2 cents. I find a lot of people start on the set collecting journey where they spend too much money on it and they end up, putting stuff on credit cards. Don't do that. That's not healthy for anybody. Buy it at your own pace or buy lots and resell some to recoup the cost. That's what I did. Most of us that have big collections, we're not rich. We didn't do this out of, having buku money. We did this over time while buying and reselling and covering some of our costs there. So, certainly, there's nothing wrong with set collecting. If you're a set collector, awesome. Just make sure you're passionate about it. Don't do it just because other people are doing it. When I started, everybody was doing it, so I kind of went into it. But, I've definitely pared down, and now I just keep the games I like for systems other than Sega Genesis and Game Gear. And those are the two that I'm most passionate about, and I think I always will be. And so those do carry a special place in my collection. So, just some food for thought. What about you guys, Bill? Around
real quick, when you started doing the whole set collecting rather, did you kind of have like a rules of engagement? I mean, definitely don't put stuff on your credit card, but like as far as like, did you scour eBay to get this stuff, or were you like me? I feel like I want to be a little bit more organic. If I can get on Renbing's server, or if I could get on Young's server, or whatever, and I could talk to someone and say, "Hey, you have this, I want to buy it." Versus like, yeah, I could easily finish my Game Gear set if I just went on eBay and just buy it now. Did you have any sort of method to your madness?
Yeah. So when I started out, like yard sales, Craigslist was not dead at that point. Facebook Marketplace, I actually got the most pickups probably out of Facebook Marketplace, which eventually turned super competitive. And you could still get a lot of good stuff on Facebook Marketplace, but you got to be on the ball. Like you got to catch it right when it gets listed. And you got to get the person to delist it. Otherwise they get blown up if it's really a good deal. So, at first it was like organic for me. I met a guy out in New Jersey that was a yard sailor, and he didn't play video games. He just would pick them up. I guess he had a family member, and they had owned a video game store and they had had some health issues, and they may have passed away. And he had all these crates and crates of games. So then he would go to yard sales and pick them up, and he'd be like, buy them cheap. Like he pay $1.50 a game. And he had a lot of good stuff. So I was like, yeah, I'll buy a bunch of stuff off you. And he didn't charge me huge prices. He charged me prices that he made a profit and that I had plenty of room to make profit or otherwise. So I would pick them up. I would pick up some stuff that I didn't need. I would pick up some stuff that I did need. And I would buy, sell, flip. And I got, like, for instance, Genesis, I got 200 games in one pickup off of him. He got that off of somebody's house at a garage sale. And, it's crazy to hear, but those type of finds are out there. And he was out there scouring early at all these garage sales for years, and he just found stuff. And I became one of his best buyers. So as soon as he found stuff, he would just reach out to me. Being kind to people and making good connections helps a lot with picking up things. Just letting your friends and family know. Like you mentioned, Bill, about the Bucky O'Hare. I've had that happen before. I had a neighbor that was like, hey, my kids had a ton of games. They had all of the Japanese RPGs you wanted from PS1, Super Nintendo stuff, all sorts of awesome stuff. And I gave them a good chunk of change for that. But I got a fair, good price for me too, rather than paying retail. And they were happy, and I was happy. So, obviously you save all the trouble of having to resell it and all the fees and shipping that come with that. But, certainly organic is the best way to do it. Do it over time. Don't just force it. Have I gone to eBay and bought stuff? Absolutely. My Sega Genesis set, when I got down to the final, like 150, it was getting hard to find them. Like I was on a lot of collectors groups. If I could find them there, or I'd be missing a manual or something of those nature, I would keep my eyes glued, but I would save searches on eBay. And what I would do is save searches are your friend if you're going to go down the eBay route, because when things get posted for a low price or are going to go auction and maybe they go low, I just keep an eye on it. If it doesn't go for a price that I want to pay for it, who cares? Then I'll wait for the next one. Don't feel such an urgency that you got to buy it right then or pay
that
up.
FOMO is real. You gotta curb that. That was a tough thing for me, and I still am guilty of it. I'm like, oh, I gotta do it right now. The Game Gear is small enough to help me learn some patience, I think. It's not, like I said, it's under 300.
It's one of those things with Game Gear. There's some titles that are just crazy rare. And there are exceptions to what I just told you. If it is crazy rare and it's the first one that's popped up in 3 months, you might need to just use your FOMO and buy it now. I mean, that's the reality of some games out there, but most games aren't that way. Game Gear has some incredibly rare titles, especially the Codemaster stuff. So when I went after those and I got the full Game Gear set, I was like, save searches. I was searching all over groups. I was searching old posts to see if somebody had one that hadn't sold before. I was searching over Europe because some of the releases in the US were identical. Over in Europe, I actually imported 2 of the Codemasters games over from Europe for Game Gear because you just couldn't find them in the States. So, get creative. Don't just, look anywhere. I would Google search, actually. Here's a tip for you. I would Google search the game and then just type like game store or something like that. And sometimes I would find like a random game store that had a website out in, wherever, North Dakota, Wisconsin. And I'd be like, okay, out in the Midwest region. I would go ahead and type that in with the game store. And I would actually find things once in a blue moon. I would find stuff that was on a game store site for a reasonable price. Same thing with manuals. I've actually had pretty good luck. And I bought lots of manuals. So like I go on their site and they're like, maybe they have all manuals are $5 and then some will be 10, some will be 15. And then I message them and I'm like, hey, I need 20 manuals. Can you do any better on the price? And I'm not usually a haggler with stores, but if I'm buying a lot in bulk, it's like, hey, can you do anything like discount wise? A lot of times like, yeah, or hey, we'll throw in free shipping. You buy all these, free ship, boom. So get creative. Don't go down every avenue that everybody else is. And don't be afraid to do trades too. Put out in search of posts on groups, because I did that as well. I put in search of, especially when I was having a hard time finding certain things, and a number of items I got, and actually some of the better condition ones I got came out of collector groups, because the collectors, treasure those high condition items. So,
all right, Bill.
Yeah, man, Steve, those are a lot of good points. I guess I live in a very rural area, as Steve shouted out there. So I do a lot of online stuff still. And, yeah, trading is definitely, if you're going to find Zeldas and Marios and things like that for decent prices, just pick them up anyways, even if you're not collecting that. So that's one tip I have, is so that you have those in your arsenal, so that if other games you're looking for come up, you have some good, what's the buzzword, trade fodder, right? So if you got a good pile of stuff, you can just trade. So that's how I've gotten a lot of my stuff, is I scour eBay, save searches, different things. But I mean, I kind of just keep my mind open to picking up anything that has value that people want. Pokemon stuff, I'm not a Pokemon guy at all, but if I come across a emerald at a garage sale for $20 or five, well, not $20 at a garage sale, $5, whatever, it's like, yeah, absolutely, I'll pick that up. I know it has value. So then I'll sell it off. Then I have some cash on hand to go, you know, do the buy it now thing. Like I need a kind of a rare copy of whatever for Genesis, and I know I'm not going to find it anywhere but eBay. Well, if I flip my resources and have some Zeldas on hand or whatever that I can sell to make some cash, so I just kind of snowball it that way. I think a lot of us do that strategy, but it works. Don't, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Just keep doing that. So that's kind of where I gravitate towards. And I'm kind of like you, Steve. I'm to a point in my collection anyway that a lot of the stuff I need or want are kind of getting to be somewhat rare items. So yeah, safe searches. That's the best advice I got for that.
I think too, also, like, don't be afraid to pick up games that you don't want that are popular or valuable if they're a good deal. Because if you get a good deal on that, oftentimes you can convert that in a trade to what you do want. And then, instead of, let's say it's a $70 game, you got it for 50 online, you don't care anything about it, but maybe you can get a $70 game you do care out of a trade for that. So, always be thinking those different angles.
Yeah. I'm 100% with what you guys were saying. Like me and Bill saw me grimace when you were talking N64. Hot take, I'm not a huge fan, but most of the cash that I got to foster my collection came from N64 lots. For some reason, N64 lots, I would stumble upon them all the time. And I had one that I made. I mean, the guy, we negotiated, and I got a good deal for him. He got a good deal for me. And it was probably about a $600 pickup. And I'm like, this is all being sold. And it sold within like 2 days. Because this was at the height of the everybody collecting full sets of N64 stuff. So I had to kind of get out of my own head for a little bit and be like, well, why would I want this? But it's just a means to an end, right? Like this helps me get this. So I had to change my mindset a little bit about it, but yeah, 100% not a Pokemon fan like you mentioned, Bill. But I will pick up Pokemon in a heartbeat. I'll change some batteries and then put them right up, and they'll be gone. So and as far as like my set, I mentioned the Game Gear, and that's really my first set that I'm actually going after. So I'm still kind of new to it, and I'm really trying to resist. Like I have about 15 games in my eBay cart right now that I'm like, should I just go ahead and pick up? But I really I want to go to a shop, and I want to buy it from a shop, or I want to, if one of you guys say, hey, I just came across this stuff, I'd rather buy it from you. Because to me, it makes it a little bit more memorable, I think, because, if I like, you just go on eBay, yeah, anybody can be a set collector in a heartbeat, but I don't know. I like the interactions. And so that's kind of my personal preference. And you tend to get a better deal if you talk to people, because you're helping them out. Like you mentioned, Steve, is you don't have to post this stuff. Just sell it on to me, and and it's a win-win. It might not sell for what you're thinking, but there's a lot of people like on Marketplace or local. They're like, well, I could just put it online. They're like, okay, so you got to ship it, and you got to worry about fees. And so like once you start talking about that, then it's kind of like, oh well, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe I'll just sell it to you, or do local stuff. So that's kind of my experience so far. I'm definitely enjoying the set collection.
I am not a set collector, although I'm actively still collecting Genesis, but I don't think I'm going to get to a point where I want the full set. Just full disclosure, I wanted to throw that out there. But anyways, no, Rom, what I was going to say, and I think that you definitely agree with this, and Steve, maybe you do too. But a fun phrase that I like to mention when it comes to this type of stuff, the set collecting, is the thrill of the hunt. Right? That's the other thing that's really fun is hunting for those specific titles and like making connections with guys and repeat buyers and sellers, like you were saying, Steve, where you had a guy that if he came across anything, he would let you know. Like that's what's fun is hunting for the specific things. So that's part of it too. I mean, that's what collecting is. Is the thrill of the hunt and finding. Like, oh, I've been looking for this game for like 6 months. Finally, a copy showed up, and I got it from my friend. Even cooler, So that's where I'm at.
100%. Yep.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us that are collectors, we enjoy that thrill in the hunt, and those that are successful of it, they're persistent and they keep up with it. Because a lot of people get frustrated when they don't find something, but you could have that one score. You can miss and miss and miss and miss, and that one score just makes up for all of those misses. And once you get that excitement and that fire in your eye, once you found it, you're like, you're hooked. You want to keep going. You're like, oh, what am I going to find next? Who cares if I missed now? I'm going to get that next treasure. Greenbean was talking about how he still finds stuff all the time now. People talk about how game collecting is dead, but it's still out there. You just got to hustle and adapt with the times kind of stuff. But you made me think of a story as well, Rom, from a pickup I had when you were mentioning about all the N64 lots. So I reached out to this guy on Facebook, and he had like 80 N64 games, and it was pretty expensive. He was asking a really high price, like not quite retail, but a little under. And I started talking to him and negotiating, and we got down to actually a pretty good price for me. I was able to keep a ton of games and sell off a bunch and basically get my money back. And I go to pick it up, and he's asking me questions about game collecting and all this. And he had gotten a bunch of games from his uncle. He had bought some from game stores, all this kind of stuff. And he goes, you see this car behind me? I said, yeah. He goes, I sold a Nintendo World Championship cart and it bought that car. He goes, my uncle was in the Nintendo World Championship and he got the card or something along those lines, or maybe he got it through another avenue, but he had one of those stored away in an attic, and I was just blown away. That was like the closest I've ever been to an NWC cart. But it's cool to find that and like just to see that some kid got a car. Although let me tell you, the car, you would have been much better off holding that NWC cart, because he would have got a lot more than that car, in today's dollars. I think he got like 10-15 grand back then. So it's interesting. And the only other point I will drop on this before we move on to the next topic is, don't be afraid to pivot or change as you collect. What I don't recommend as a collector is, a lot of people sometimes sell stuff off and then have regret. If you think you want to sell something off, set it to the side, give yourself a few weeks, give yourself a month, see if you still want to sell it. Don't do it overnight. A lot of people do that, like that. They get this itch and they start just selling certain things. But, don't be afraid to pivot either. If you bought a ton of NES games like I did and you've realized, hey, I don't really care about half these crappy games, it's okay to change. A lot of us have a goal one day and we change it, 2 years from now, we're a completely different goal. And that's part of collecting. Be flexible, be adaptable. Don't do things you think you're going to regret. Give it some time. But other than that, everybody's collecting journey is different.
I remember Bill, like, I was telling him I was going to break up my Capcom set. He's like, man, are you sure? Because he was going for the Capcom set. I was like, yeah, I need to put this. I'm collecting for something else. So I could sell DuckTales 2, Rescue Rangers 2, Mighty Final Fight, and like build that up. And he's like, man, he questioned me like 3 or 4 times. And for a second I was like, do I want to do this? And then over time I'm like, yeah, let's just do it. And same with my NES collection. Like I mentioned, I had over 300 games, and now I'm down to maybe 120. And I'm good with that. And I could probably trim it down a little bit more, just because like a year or two ago, I was really focused on it. But now I'm like, yeah, let's do Game Gear. And now I'm getting more and more into the Japanese stuff. And so it's a means to, it's just kind of help supplement.
So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about the history of the video game collecting market for those of you that are maybe new, or even those that have been in this for a while. Maybe you weren't around, 10 years ago. Maybe you weren't around longer than that. But it's kind of had a lot of ebbs and flows over the years. It actually started back in the 90s. So people don't think of video game collecting back then, but Atari was all the rage. I mean, think about Atari came out in the 70s. Even they had some other consoles and things in the 80s. The video game market went bankrupt for a while until Nintendo came around and saved the day. But collectors actually were going after stuff back then. There was a whole rage about it. And if anybody was collecting back in the maybe like around 2010, 2005, and even today, when you would go look and you would find lots, you would see these Atari 2600 lots, but they were never just like 2 games in a console. There were like 30 games in a console, 50 games in a console. And I kind of wonder if some of that was the segment out of the Atari collecting as it faded off into the sunset. And I think one of the reasons why Atari didn't really have the long staying power as far as the bulk of the library, there are stuff that are very collectible for Atari even today that are very expensive and continue to go up in price. So I'm not talking about those. I'm just talking about the general Atari collector. But the games were kind of in that transition era where they weren't a lot of fun. There were some games that were really fun, and there were some that were just so basic. They were just kind of like a bunch of beeps, and you weren't sure what you were doing, and the quality, and that's part of the reason why the market collapsed from Atari was the quality of the games went down, and people were just like, what are you selling us? Like, everybody talks about the infamous ET. Like, nobody knew how to play ET back in the day, and they say it's a game that killed Atari. But it had its 20-year resurgence. That's a general rule of thumb for a lot of these is 20 years. The nostalgia kicks in. So 1990s, that was the big boom. And then they're following the NES collecting. I know there was a lot of collectors that in the early 2000s were starting to get into it. By the time I got into it, like, NES, probably around 2009, 2010, there were people doing a lot of set collecting. So that was kind of the next big wave. Like, NES was what everybody wanted. And it's still kind of the pinnacle of like sealed collecting for a lot of people other than certain iconic titles. And I think NES is really that era where games started to be fun to play today still that were designed. And so it has a lot different staying power than the Atari market did. But the market kind of took off from there. NES spiraled to Super Nintendo was slowly creeping in the background. And then N64 collecting a full set kind of took off, and then GameCube. So you started to see the really big surge of the Nintendo era, I would call it, of collecting, the 2010 to 2020. Some of it even kind of peaked somewhere around 2020 to 2022. And, that slowly trickled out. Sega, had its slow creep in collecting over the years, but it really didn't catch a stride like Sega Genesis and stuff until like 3 or 4 years ago, I think. That's when I really started seeing more and more people in the inventory start drying up on eBay. So Sega has always had collectors, and it's always had a lot of people going after the games, but definitely I think there's more Sega Genesis collectors today than there were before. And currently, whenever the market dips, you always see with any kind of collectible, you'll see ebbs and flows to the market. So as mentioned earlier, there has been a little bit of a retreating of pricing for a little bit, since the market has been down. A lot of post-pandemic inflation, other things have impacted all collectibles as a whole. But I don't think video games have really been hit as hard as some of the other sectors. So, it's always possible you could see another resurgence. But I think we're to the point where there's so many collectors and even the conventions and stuff over the years. Like, I used to go to too many games every year in Philadelphia. The amount of people that go every year is more. Even though it's 2024, you see more and more. And I think that's the story of retro game collecting over the year, and the history of it is people have grown nostalgic. Their kids are in it. You see young people in it that didn't grow up with this stuff, and that's all healthy for the long term of the market. Do I need to put a predictor on where the market goes? I have no idea, but I don't think the market's going to fall off a cliff either. I think there's enough people that care about collecting in these old titles that, whether it goes up or goes down a little, the market has reached some level of stability, in my opinion. So that's just a brief overview of the history. Ram, back to you.
All right. Yeah. That pretty much, that's a good sum up. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right. So now, next up is sealed game collecting. I don't have too much experience with it. I actually have a couple, but and I actually sent one to Wada, and I had a bad experience. So I don't know if I'll be getting too much into it personally. But I'll go ahead and start. Like my experience with sealed games, I sent one that, it was sealed. Like it was a GameCube game. Everything looked great. They came back, shot it back to me, and they're like, "Nope, we can't verify the seal on this." And I was like, "What the heck, man?" Like I've looked at several sealed games, and I'm like, "This is it." I sent one more to Wada, and it was actually a misprint of an NES game that I sent, and not really a sealed game, but talking about Wada and stuff. But it was an okay experience. I know it took off in the 2020, 2021. It got stupid, but Bill, I'll go to you next.
I don't have any sealed games, honestly, but it's something that intrigues me for sure. So those of you out there that maybe haven't gone down that route, I know there's different companies, and Steve, you can probably elaborate too on, WADA is probably the more common one that most collectors have heard of. But, Steve, I'll let you kind of take it from me here in a minute. But, it's something that, some people want to collect a sealed game for the purpose of just themselves, just to have on their shelf as a display piece. And it's a game that's maybe nostalgic to them or important to them. They don't necessarily want to play it. Then obviously the main allure to sealed is to get it graded, just like sports cards. Going back to our childhoods, a lot of sports cards get graded and on the condition, and it's the same thing. Some people want to be just, I want to have this Sonic 2 that's sealed on my shelf forever. Gonna get it put in this sweet looking thick acrylic case that's got the grade on it, and it's a display piece, a talking piece when people come to my game room. That's all fine and dandy. And then obviously there's the reselling thing. It, increases the value. So you can, so the ideal situation is to come across a sealed whatever, doesn't matter what game it is. And you got to send that in for grading, and then you can resell it for a profit. So there's a few different avenues you can go down. Steve, can you clean up what I don't understand maybe, or what I'm a little unsure of as far as like companies or the process behind it?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people ask me for advice, as on Discord server, since I admin that, or even collecting in general, because I've been around a while, about, hey, what do you think this is going to grade? And I usually can get pretty close. My eyeball test nowadays, there's some things you need to see in person, especially like some of the more modern games. But when it comes to like the cardboard and all that, I usually can get within a decimal letter grade or pretty close. And it's a hobby that's been around a long time. It's also controversial because a lot of game collectors are like, there's some that just love sealed collecting and some that hate it. And they're like, no, those sealed collectors are dumb. Like, they're buying and putting them in these coffins. Games are meant to be played. And if you go in certain groups and you post about sealed collecting, like the Sega Genesis collectors group, which has like ridiculous amount of people in it, they'll eat your lunch on that. Like, this is, so many people will come in and tell you their 2 cents about how dumb you are. But, well, obviously it's the internet, so, you can say whatever you want and get away with it, but for the most part. But sealed collecting actually is interesting to me, because I had some sealed games. I had sealed NES games. I had one that was absolutely mint condition. I mean, it probably would have scored, at the top of the charts back in the day for 8 Eyes. And then I had a sealed Sonic and Knuckles that was mint condition as well, and I sold that for $200, and I wish I had that back. Some of us didn't really have the foresight to know that when we found these sealed games, they were going to be worth money at some point. So if you mainly were a game player / collector, you were buying not sealed stuff. But at the time, you had, when I started really picking up on it, and they're trying to convert it kind of in a comic book way. So if you look at like WADA, or you're a comic collector or even a card collector, you see in the scale to 10. So WADA's got, a scale based on comics. CGC video games came out in more recent years, like the last 2 years, and they're following the same scale as comics. Of course, CGC is a huge name in comics. And then WADA got bought by PSA, which PSA everybody knows from sports card grading. And then in the background, all this time has been VGA. VGA is the one you have to go to if you want a non-standard game graded, meaning like a collector's edition or something that doesn't fit in the standard footprint of a game. You got to go to VGA. They're the only ones that do custom sizes. They're pretty expensive, and I never understood. I haven't looked lately, but VGA had a very outdated website. It was very confusing about submitting games, and they're still around. A lot of people like them, and they stay busy, but I feel like they've kind of lost some steam compared to WADA and CGC.
I think you have to have a membership on top of paying the fee to submit. I was trying to do one.
You're thinking of CGC.
Okay.
Yeah, CGC, you had to have a membership. They just did away with that, actually, like within the last month or so. And now you do not have to have a membership. It's just discounted tier prices. So if you pay for the membership, your price for grading goes down with CGC. And for me, I waited a long time with some of my sealed stuff that I do have graded until CGC dropped their product. I mean, I do have WADA graded games, but I'm a fan of CGC. I just like their case a little better, their casing design. I mean, maybe I'm used to seeing the comic books, but anybody that doesn't like sealed games or hates on it, like the thing I would just say to anybody out there is like any of you that collect games, even if it's games just to play, any legit collecting hobby, whether it's coin collecting or otherwise, the biggest way for a hobby to gain legitimacy and long-term growth is through having a grading provider or a grading area of some sort. It adds a condition factor. It adds a legitimacy to those that are spending money so they can be qualified. If you don't have that, that means that your hobby is not as healthy as you think it is. So there's even if you don't want to do it, like cool, but I wouldn't necessarily bash it either, because it's important not just for the sealed guys, but it's important for the regular game collectors too. We don't want our games to drop in price. We want this hobby to keep building, keep getting attention, and that's part of the avenues it goes through. One of the questions that everybody asks me as far as grading is, what is this going to grade? There's a couple basics you need to know if you are going to dabble into game collecting. Grading is a lot more nuanced than you realize. You just go, oh, this looks visually pretty good. Doesn't mean it's going to get a good grade. It starts off with, especially if you're looking at cardboard box stuff, they ding you differently based on the type of damage, the size of the damage. So small things will count less, but if you have a lot of small things, maybe it looks good overall, but you got a lot of small things, those will add up. If you have one really big thing, that's going to be a big reduction in your grade. If you have a lot of little things, that adds up too. So you got to think it in perspective. So what are they looking at? So dings, dents, cardboard boxes looking for creasing. That's something you see a lot where somebody pushed on it and left like a little crease in the cardboard. Corners is a common thing. Are the corners smushed? Are the corners really dented in? Do the corners poke through the seal? So you usually, with most of the providers except VGA gives you one overall grade, which is a little more confusing to, I think, people that aren't used to VGA or comic books. Their scale is a little different. It's just one grade, whereas they break the seal and the box grade out separate at WADA, at CGC. So, your scale goes from 0 to 10, although I don't know if you can really get a 0. Maybe it's a 1. And then there's decimal place changes there. But yeah, I mean, the cardboard boxes to me are a little easier to judge. Just think, is it small? Is it big? And then, you can kind of come up in your head, how would you deduct that from the scale? And take a guess at it and see if you're submitting your game, see how you do. Eventually you'll get a little more calibrated if you've seen enough of them, and you get a feel for what they're looking for. You never know. Sometimes you get a better grade than you think, and sometimes you get a worse grade. And, you kind of learn from it and take another closer eye. The seal grade is important. I will tell you, most collectors do not like to buy things below an A seal. So if you get a B plus or a C, that's not going to hold. That's going to be a huge value hit on you. So I wouldn't go after things that have massive tears in the seals. Little things, little nicks and stuff, you can still get A seal. Depends on how many of them you have. Stuff like Genesis, they grade a little more leniently, just because that cellophane and stuff that they used on it is super flimsy and tears super easy. So it's pretty rare you don't have at least some little nicks. And if you don't, and it's a perfect immaculate seal, that could bring, a pretty good grading rating there. And then when you get into modern stuff, what you really got to look at if you're got like the little clamshell DVD cases is dings and dents, because like they hold up a lot better when they're plastic. So it's a lot harder to damage plastic than it is a cardboard box. But sometimes people would like put a piece of paper on there and they write a note. And if you look in the light and you start shimmering it, you're like, oh, I can see pencil marks, kind of dug into the cover art. They're looking at things like, is it centered, right? So you want to look, is the art the correct way from front to back? Is it too far to the front? Is it too far to the back? Is the spine in the right place? Look at it vertically. Is the art too high, too low? Is it crooked in the case? Those are all the types of things that they're looking at. So sometimes you'll see pokes where like they're dinged in and it ripped the actual cover art. So that's obviously a big one that's low, as well as the centering and placement of the art. Sun fading is another one you got to consider. There's, when it comes to seals too, there's a lot of things you'll see it mentioned on there. Sometimes like you see like RTB, that's right top bottom. That's a sealing method. There's the C seams. You got Y folds on a lot of the CD and DVD, and that's just the type of seal where it's folded at the top and then sealed. So there are third party seals, and that's part of what Rom, you mentioned about your game couldn't verify the seal. Sometimes they're third party sealed in a factory or by the retailer. And if it's a type of technique that is common to counterfeits, there's sometimes they can't say for sure if it is or is not. I know that's a little frustrating, but it's better to know that than to not know.
Right.
They don't want to certify anything that's not legit. So you will see a lot of different markings for seals on the box, but in a nutshell, that's where it is. It's like the comic book community. Everybody wants the best game. It doesn't mean some of the most valuable stuff is the popular games, big name stuff, but they want it in the best grade, right? Everybody wants the best game in the best grade. And look at pop reports, because how many are out there dictate price, but they're starting to get a lot more transparency. You can go in WADA. You can look up, I think CGC has pop reports out there too, if I'm not mistaken. So you can go look at pop reports if you care about that. For me, I only keep some graded games, and it's just stuff I care about. So, kind of in a nutshell, I know it was a little longer probably than I anticipated, but that's what you want to know starting out, right? And also don't buy raw. Be careful about buying raw non-graded games when you're starting out, because you can end up overpaying a lot of times. Don't just assume it's worth what somebody's listing it for. Basically, a raw game should sell for what it's worth in its condition, plus the grading fee. So if it's $50 to grade it at that price point, then it should sell for $50 less, and then you go grade it. But it's always a risk and a gamble. So I wouldn't pay that, but that's technically where the value should be.
Yep, I learned, and that's what this is about. Just lessons learned on what to do and what not to do, and hopefully we can help you out with just giving you a little bit more insight. So let's do our close. We're gonna close everything last 5 or so minutes with price apps. And first thing that comes to mind is price charting. I think we all have our opinion. I think our opinion are pretty similar to each other when it comes to price charting. And basically, price charting is going to be what everyone's going to. If you're trying to sell a game, they're going to fire up price charting. They're going to say, "Oh, well, this is worth X amount." We'll kind of go around the room. We'll start with you, Bill. What's your take on price charting? Like I said, we all have our opinions on it, so we'll go around. We can explain a little bit. All right, Bill.
Yeah. So pricecharting.com is what we're referring to, is, just kind of like the way that folks can look up the value of games. So the reason there's some controversy around price charting is they take, they aggregate sales across the internet, eBay and such, like that. And I think where people kind of get hung up is they don't take into account auctions. They just, the more common thing is the buy it now listings. So you get that's where I'm at. If you get something like a copy of Zelda for NES, million copies plus out there, it's going to be pretty accurate. There's a ton of sales data. It can compile a pretty accurate price.
Yeah, definitely a good point of reference versus no, this is not the de facto, going to Walmart and that this is the price on here.
Yeah, I think for price price charting, that's a great summary, Bill. Absolutely. It's all about how much data it has in there. Sometimes it pulls stuff wrong, which you can report, but it doesn't always get removed. So like it may be you're looking at a CIB price and it pulled in a loose cart, or it's a loose cart and it pulled in a CIB. And if things don't sell that often, it can be all over the map. The other problem that price charting has is it doesn't take condition into effect. And whenever you're buying or selling a game, don't do it off of price charting. Use it as a reference, because you could really be underselling you if this game's in nice condition. You mentioned auctions too, Bill. I actually don't like to factor auctions into any kind of price evaluation, because the price on auctions bomb sometimes, and sometimes they go over what they should when two people get FOMO. I find that the buy it now pricing is actually much more consistent and a better indicator of where the selling price would be. So, the other problem it has too is when you look at like manuals or boxes just by themselves, they offer that pricing, but it's always so wrong because they don't have enough sales data usually for it to be accurate. It'll say a manual. I've seen people on collecting forums, like it'll say a manual is worth $10, but the CIB game's like $200. And somebody on this, hey, this manual only sells for $10. Look at price charting. It's like, no, if you actually went through and dug, you'd see that the last manual sold for $80 on eBay. But, price charting has a hard time picking up when there's those less common things. And it has a hard time differentiating that it's only a manual. The same thing with consoles. Consoles can come with a controller, come with a box. It really struggles to pull the right info in for consoles. So at the end of the day, if it sells a lot, if it's like a Super Mario Sunshine, it's probably going to be reasonably accurate just because there's enough sales data. Anytime it says like 5 sales a day or something like that, it'll probably be reasonably there. But, make sure you're getting what you should for your games if they're in better condition. Don't forget the condition factor. It's not going to tell you that by price charting. Use it as a reference when you're buying stuff. If you need a quick valuation, you're like, oh, what's this lot worth? Use the lot calculator. They have that for free. You can add up to 10 games on it. Just do it, a couple times if it's a big lot. But that's what I use it for. I use it for and new people starting out to get a feel for pricing. But I don't use it at all. I go to eBay if I really need a definitive pricing.
eBay solds are the best. So to tie into the price charting, we've got apps that you can use too. Really, probably the most popular is GameEye. And there's a free version, but you can also upgrade it. It's like $5 to get that, which has some really, really good features. I know that Steve uses it. Bill, I'm not sure if you use it much, but it does have a barcode scanning feature, and you can actually scan the text or the front of a game, and it's good as long as the game's in like perfect shape or there's no reflections. But those apps are super handy, especially if you're going around, if you're at garage sales or if you're at a game shop or whatever, and you want to know like, hey, what should I be paying for this? It's great to have this type of stuff at your fingertips. I'll pass along. Steve, do you have any good experience using these as well? Or
Yeah, I use GameEye. It's super easy to track your collection, what you have. You can also keep a want list on there as well. It aggregates data from price charting, so it'll give you a rough idea of like how much your collection's worth, how many titles you have out of so many on a system. It's just a nice way you can track your value over time. It's free. I mean, they don't ask for money. I think they take donations, like you said, like $5 a month or something. But yeah, I think that's the most popular one. There's a couple other, I think like CLZ Games is one of them that costs money. I think there's another one called My Game Collection or something, but I don't have a lot of experience with those. I think CLZ Games, I've run into quite a few people that have used that one. And then Price Charting itself has a collection tracker as well, and you can share that with other people. So, certainly no limitation. I don't think price charting charges anything for tracking your collection. They have a barcode scanner also on the price charting website if you're out and about. And eBay has a barcode scanner while we're talking about that. If you want a quick look on something that has a barcode, it has to be new enough to have a barcode. Some of the older games may not have barcodes on their actual box, but if it does, you scan it, boom, you can real quick, yard sale, wherever, check it. GameEye, same thing. You can do the same thing in on price charting. So definitely great tools. It's worthwhile. It'll make sure you don't get duplicates, especially if you have quite a few games you're out and you can't remember if you have it. I certainly have done that and bought a duplicate or two over the years. and had to get rid of them. So certainly check them out if you want to get organized on your collection.
Yeah, and actually to toss in real quick, Price Charting did just come out with an app, and I actually have it installed. I just forget about it. I use GameEye more, so I don't know if you guys have used Bill, if you've jumped on it yourself. But just for everybody to know, there's the app. Not 100% sure how good it is. It came out within the last month or two.
Yeah, I'm with you. I've seen it, haven't used it. I'm an avid GameEye user and enjoy it. The thing I like about that GameEye app is you can just, narrow it down to just see your Genesis stuff, and it'll, the value of your Genesis and how many games you have for Genesis, and you can organize the layout of the thumbnails by title or by value, or there's just a lot of sorting qualities of life that are kind of nice on there.
Yeah, I love the filtering aspect because it helps a lot. And then also, I like being able to track and see like, oh, your Genesis collection is worth an estimated. It's never 100% accurate, but at least gives you an idea.
Yeah, that's all we're looking for, is an idea for sure.
We're going to close this episode out with one more question for everybody. What is the oddest item in your collection that kind of people look around, like looking at your stuff and like, what the heck is this? Start with you, Bill. What would you say is kind of the weirdest thing that you have?
Yeah, I've got a really weird one that has some nostalgia, or not even nostalgic memories tied to it, but more sentimental even. Well, kind of. Well, it'll make sense. I have a signed, not signed by anyone significant that had to do with the game, but I have a signed copy of Shaq Fu for the Genesis that I had some friends in high school that, for whatever reason, named their band Shaq Fu. And it was the oddest thing in the world. He thought it would be a fun band name, because even back then, and like we're talking the year 2000, even back then that game had, a bad rap and just, people dogging on it, just, Shaq in a video game, really like a fighting game. So anyway, so they named their band Shaq Fu. And after each show, the leader of the band, he like bought a whole bunch of loose copies of the game and like would sign a copy like with a Sharpie and like hand it out at the end of the show just for fun. Like just this weird like thing. Like it was a rock band, or whatever. But so I still have that actually. And I, went as far as putting it back, I got a clamshell and got it. And then I had him re-sign it 20 years later. So it's kind of a weird, like definitely fits the mold of strangest thing. Fully.
Steve, what you got?
This was tough for me. I have like a couple, so I'll make it quick. But one of them, I have a neon sign of Sonic the Hedgehog that's a dry erase board, and I'm just kind of like, why of all the things did you make Sonic into a dry erase board? And he looks a little funky because it's like vacuum formed. So it's definitely a little bit of an oddity. I'm sure somebody that's listening has seen those before. The other one is I have a set of McDonald's collectible stuff for Sonic and Sega. I have a Translite that has all the Happy Meal toys, and it actually came with all the Sonic, I think it was Sonic 3 toys, as well as the Happy Meal bag. Like that's something you wouldn't think somebody would have a copy of. Have a Happy Meal bag with Sonic on it. And then the last one I was going to mention is there's, it's tied in with the Sonic McDonald's, but I actually have a cardboard display with the peel off signs, the entries for one of their contests for, I think it was win your chance to be in a Sega game or something of that nature, which was kind of cool. It's brand new. I mean, it's still sealed, but I have no idea why I own that. I'm never going to probably put it on display, but it's just cool to look at. It's one of those little countertop nostalgia kind of things. How about you, Ron?
So mine's actually, after hearing y'all's, mine's kind of boring. I have a translated version of Splatterhouse for NES. So not many people know probably that Splatterhouse was actually released for the Famicom, and I got a translated version, and it's a black cart with blood splatters everywhere, but it's a chibi game, so like it definitely does not mesh well with the kind of game it is, because it's just this little cutesy guy running around versus like what you would see on Sega or TurboGrafx. But yeah, I have it on display, and people walk by and are like, what is this blood-stained game with this little cartoon character? That's probably one of my more odd ones. But definitely y'all's are a signed Shaq Fu, man. You need to go to like a you need
That's
to get
funny.
Shaq really try to get Shaq to sign it too. Next to the other guy. That should be a goal.
Right? Yeah. I don't know if it's true or not, but I had heard that Shaq like actively was trying to get rid of all the copies because he's like embarrassed all these years later or something like that. I don't know if there's any truth to that. Steve, you maybe know, but
That's one of those collecting urban myths.
Yeah, dude, Shaq is a self-promoter, man.
yeah, knowing Shaq, I'm sure it's not true, but I can just picture him like going on eBay and like buying as many copies as are out there, like just hoard them all because he doesn't want him out there. But no, he's a self promoter. It's probably an urban legend, like you said, Steve.
Considering that they reproduced Shaq Fu in recent times, I think Shaq is okay with Shaq Fu.
Shaq's okay with Shaq Fu.
Good point.
This concludes another episode. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.